Ooh, people are not gonna like this one. I'm so inconsistent with this, but I love this little thing. One of my most controversial hot takes about Drag Race that some people would probably argue is a bad take is that RuPaul's Drag Race season 6 was a fine season, but it was not one of the best seasons. And often when I say that, it gets people to raise up their pitchforks and then get their torches out and they start rioting. But as soon as I start explaining my side, people start to understand what I'm talking about. This is a season that I think had a great cast, but was riddled with overproduction. It was riddled with too much meddling. That bird is talking. And there was such heavy-handed producing, but not in an interesting way, in my opinion. I make often unpopular and controversial Drag Race think pieces, much like what I'm about to do today. This season had a lot of really cool things. It sets up the very first Rusical, which is cool. It has a super iconic Snatch game. It's got these queens that are so iconic. Adore Delano, Bianca Del Rio, Courtney Act, Gia Gunn, Ben de la Creme, Jocelyn Fox, Laganja, Trinity, the fashion icon, the silhouette icon, Kelly Mantle. I do think that this cast was super mismanaged, and I really want to clarify that when I do these think pieces, I'm never discrediting the work that the queens do. I'm almost always commenting about what the producers are doing. Because when you're creating a show, you want to make sure that your narrative is cohesive all the way to the end. You want to have a solid idea of who your person is that you're supposed to root for and who you're not supposed to root for, and what the audience sees is what you've carefully curated for them and presented them in a package. And I feel like up until this season, Drag Race was mostly a competition. Season 1 was getting off the ground, but was really trying to appeal to as many people as possible. Season 2 and 3 was really trying to figure out if it wanted to be a reality show or a competition show, and it struggled to figure out what it wanted to do in both of those seasons. They had such dramatic and polarizing characters that were on their show, but they had such strong points of view, aesthetics, and skills that they really put to the test. In season 4, they kind of carried some of that energy over, but it really was about who had the best narrative, which at the time was Jeremy and Sharon. And then, of course, you have little things here and there that crop up. People like Willem, who was just a fire starter in the workroom. People like Latrice, who are so lovable. It wasn't so much about how good they did in the challenge, but how much we wanted them as people to go on and get to the next episode. Because really, for season 4 and 5, it's not so much about the challenge, it's more about the person that's in the challenge. And I think a lot of people can attest that they really enjoy Latrice, but they didn't think she did good in the challenges or on the runway, but they liked her. And season 4 and 5, I think we're starting to stray from it being a competition show and really started to focus in on, this is TV, but we're not really sure how to make this happen. And then they get to 6, and 6 is just television. 6, I think, has a super through line. We need 2 contestants, 2 specific contestants, to get to this Rusical so that it succeeds. If we have anybody else in these slots, this Rusical is not going to work the way that we need it to. We cannot have a repeat of Can I Get an Amen, where we had a solid idea for what this was supposed to sound like, but one person lost all hope today, and then it doesn't sound good anymore. We need that Jinx and Alaska magic that Can I Get an Amen had, but we need that to carry through for 10 minutes. We have 2 people that we must get to that point, no matter what. I don't know if Bianca necessarily was handpicked from the start to go all the way to the end, but Bianca did pretty decently the whole time, and she had some great story moments. She had a villain to hero storyline, and that's not something you can artificially create on television. That's something that happens organically, and Bianca did that. But then they lost the plot with Bianca. She was mentoring Trinity practically the whole season, and they lost all these storylines with Trinity. These moments with Laganja and Adora, this tension that they had, never really got resolved. Darian was kind of feuding with everybody in the room, but for some reason really zeroes in on Dela. And when you're recording 48 plus hours of content and you whittle that all down, the easiest way to make someone who's very charismatic and charming and doesn't really have any issues with anybody in the room, but occasionally gets frustrated that someone is doing well or that someone is being maybe not the type of drag that you respond to, is you cut out everything else that they did or said that day, and then they only look aggressive. This particular season is one where they zeroed in on don't give butch, don't give boy. You're only allowed to give girl. And if you do anything beyond that, you're not doing drag right. People like Milk, who had really conceptual ideas, just got focused on as a messy person. This was a season where really, I can't hammer in enough that it felt like they were making television. They were curating characters. And you see that translate into seasons 7, 8, and 9 as well. But in 9, they really break away from that. And that's a different conversation for a different day. But this style of heavy-handed crafting of these characters, quote unquote, on this drag show is the primary role before drag being the secondary feature of RuPaul's Drag Race. And with all of this info in mind, I have a lot of thoughts about how season 6 was mishandled. Specifically, in the people that they chose to push forward for storylines that ended up not going anywhere. We had a lot of unresolved tension between Jocelyn and Courtney. We had unresolved tension between Adore and Laganja that we did not get resolved until past the finale, but at that point, it almost didn't seem substantial anymore. We had this narrative of Bianca and Trinity really challenging each other's nerves and Bianca helping Trinity to overcome her struggles and get out of her head. But then we never see Trinity actually get that resolve. Sort of just a Ru says, I'm so proud of you, and then nothing. It's like going to a goon session and never finishing. All of these little plot lines that got mishandled along the way of propelling Bianca, Adore, and Courtney to the end, whether or not that was completely deserved or fair is the question that I have. Would the season have gone differently if they had not been favoring Adore and Courtney from the get to get them to shade the Rusical? That's what we're going to discuss here. There's a lot to look into and there's a lot to talk about. So without further ado, let's do this. And remember, if you do not like what I'm saying, you click out of the video or keep listening and let your mind be open, because this show is super produced. It's not me saying that I think that somebody sucks or that somebody's drag sucks. I have done drag and I know how hard it is. I am always commenting on how production ran the whole thing. Without further ado, here it is. If you've listened to my podcast, you know that I have a lot of opinions about this particular season, especially with the criticism of things like giving boy or giving butch. I feel like this season was really harshly judged on glamour, but none of the runway prompts particularly gave that they were looking for glamour, and also none of the challenges really accommodated for that either. People were punished for being themselves. People like Gia, who had an incredible personality and was so ready for television, was sort of punished for that. People like Laganja were really punished for being, quote unquote, too much. And then people like Adore or Jocelyn were hired to be on this show knowing what their aesthetic was, and then they kind of got roasted alive every episode. Meanwhile, other queens were really propelled to the end while not giving that much. Or we're kind of giving the same thing that other queens were giving. And nothing bothers me more than inconsistent critiques. And I felt like that happened this whole season. So I wanted to rejudge this season using a different rubric, going more off of, were they funny in comedy challenges? Were they serious in serious challenges? Did they deliver well on the runway? Did they meet the brief or did they not? And were they being held to a different standard than someone else? How did certain plot armors allow certain queens to get through unscathed? Those are the things that I want to judge on. So let's get into this gig, starting with episode 1 at RuPaul's Big Opening Part 1. So as I mentioned about plot armor and people getting propelled to the end that may not have gone otherwise, I think that this season had two big characters that had plot armor. and that was Adore Delano and Courtney Act. They were required to be in the Shade the Rusical episode. There is no way to convince me in my mind that anybody else was meant to play the role of Penny. It was always supposed to be the battle of the idols. Which one of these two was going to come out victorious over the other, and really create this B plot line within the show that didn't end up really going anywhere because Courtney's beef ended up with Jocelyn, and Adore's beef ended with Laganja. So this storyline of the Battle of the Idols and comparing them to each other really was just a red herring to allow us to not really pay attention to maybe some of Bianca's flubs. And Adore really avoided being at the bottom based on her personality and charisma, which is great, but the outfit that was constructed in episode 1 and the leadership in episode 3 were not the moment. Same with Courtney. That constructed look was not it. So Adore really benefited from being required in that Rusical because say Adore had gone against Vivacious. It's possible that maybe she could have gone home. I think that if Adore had gone against someone else that was in the bottom, maybe like April, because they didn't really like her quote-unquote butch look, April may have sent her home. Who's to say? I still think the look was rancid and it deserved being in the bottom too. So just getting right into it, Ben de la Creme still wins this episode because I think this was a great look and it was super well constructed, especially for being a hot glue gun girl. It doesn't look like it was hot glue gunned. It's very couture looking. And I think that this was a very fair judgment in comparison to everyone else that was on the runway that week. However, as I stated, Adore will be in the bottom, 1 for the awkward hemline, 2, this weird shirt that's over it and this ugly belt, this big bow that didn't really make sense with the rest of it. Why was she a mermaid? Why was it a bad mermaid? It was so badly constructed. It's just really a train wreck. This is a travesty to every single design challenge. And if Adore wasn't needed in Shade the Rusical, she would have lip sync. I'm going to make her lip sync anyway, instead of Vivacious being at the bottom because I wholeheartedly disagreed with Vivacious's placement. I thought her look was really couture, and I thought it really showed her as a drag performer, and the whole thing about the hair was really odd to me as well. So this week, Adore is going to go against Kelly Mantle, the iconic, the legendary, the lovely, and unfortunately, Kelly is going to go home this week. I love Kelly Mantle. I think she really left her stamp on Drag Race, and I'm sad that she had to go, but I completely agree with her placement, and as a famous queen once said, don't wear bacon. I kind of want to punctuate this by really emphasizing that this whole giving boy thing and critiquing the hairline that April had was also really odd, and I didn't appreciate that either. I think drag is so much bigger and so much broader than just giving female illusion, and I did not appreciate this narrative all season, and you will see that my favoring towards avant-garde drag will persist through the rest of this video. In episode 2, RuPaul's Big Opening Part 2, again, Courtney Act kind of suffered the exact same plot armor that Adore did. She was needed for Shade the Rusical. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that I don't think Darian's look was that bad. Is this a mall dress? Yes. This is such a simple look. The coochie ruching really is not that distracting like Courtney tried to make it seem. The actual shirt itself is kind of cute. It's giving Darian's drag at this time, which was not really big and glamorous. We didn't see this sort of glamour thing until much later. Darian was giving real woman walking to the mall, leaving church, going to the IHOP, and doing brunch. Like, that was the drag that she was giving at the time, and I thought she did it well. She looked good in this episode, and this outfit is constructed well. Meanwhile, Courtney came out in a bralette and a piece of fabric tied around her body. There's no outfit. There is nothing to this. This is a very simple outfit that we literally saw Pheromone get ripped apart for wearing something like this in her season. But Farrah wasn't an endgame character, so she got critiqued harder than Courtney did for giving almost nothing. And I believe Courtney took this skirt off in the episode. This was atrocious. This was a crime to every single first episode ever fashion look. And yes, Courtney devoured that photo challenge and deserves props for how beautiful she looked. But this is bad, Rue. So this week, I am giving the win to Milk because I really do feel like Milk deserved it. This was very avant-garde. This was very high fashion. I love what was done with Bianca. I really think that it looked nice, but this critique about not needing the beard from Milk was odd as well. And this was just the time that Drag Race was in. It was very anti doing anything outside the box. It was very anti doing anything mask. We saw Milan get ripped apart for doing masculine drag. We saw Milk get ripped apart for masculine drag, quote unquote. Same with April. Same with Vivacious. Jocelyn. We saw this really angry reaction towards it, and it didn't need to be that way because this set in motion, I think a lot of people really feeling like, okay, drag doesn't just need to be XYZ. When Alaska did Boy Drag in season 5, there was a distinct difference because Alaska was just wearing overalls and a little bit of makeup, but wasn't really doing drag. There's nothing wrong with boy drag, but it wasn't super elevated. It was still good for the time, but it wasn't elevated. So that kind of opened a door for Milk to do something really avant-garde like this, and it wasn't rewarded where it should have been. And then the very next season, they said, we're going to do a bearded runway because they realized Milk's influence and power over drag and what it was doing to the culture at the time. And this should have been recognized as the winner. So the bottoms this week are going to be Courtney Act, as well as Magnolia Crawford for giving whatever the hell this was. I don't need to even critique this because you could just look at it and look with your own eyes and know that this is bad. Helen Keller could look at this and say that was bad. This look was really horrendous and absolutely deserved to go home no matter who she was going against in that lip sync. I think Magnolia was going to go home. So it honestly doesn't matter that much that she is going against Courtney Act in this alternate universe because Courtney would still send her home. And we say goodbye to Magnolia Crawford. Next, in episode 3, Scream Queens, we had a really fun concept. I love that the two groups were split apart and that they chose the people that they worked with in episode 1. I kind of wish that maybe the pairings had been a little bit different, could have made things a little interesting. We start to shake things up a bit here. I go back and forth on Darian's win. Giving a head in a box was really fun, but ultimately I think I was more entertained by Ben de la Creme. Plus, I really liked her outfit just a little bit more on the runway. I think that Dela really knocked this out of the park. Now, as for the bottoms, this might upset people, but I don't think April really deserved to lip sync that week. No, her performance was not good. That butch thing was not good, but I've already critiqued that I hate that they made them do something quote unquote butch and then critiqued that it wasn't quote butch enough. I don't really even know what you're supposed to do with that. It's a weird prompt to ask you to change up everything and do butch. They did the same thing to Kenya, and I felt like that was gross. In any case, I thought this outfit was stellar, and I think ultimately, Adore should have been in the bottom for being such a bad group leader. Everyone was underprepared in that group. No one was ready for the challenge. Everybody did quite bad because Adore didn't keep everybody focused. And of course, Vivacious was just miserable the whole time, giving us kind of one of the worst performances in an acting challenge of all time. And I always feel like the group leader is responsible for the success or the failure of a team, and Adore was really responsible for the failure of that team, therefore is going to go against Vivacious and unfortunately send Vivacious home this week. So now going into episode 4, Shade the Rusical, we have that lovely plot armor that we have been dissolving away this whole time, and so far Adore has 2 bottoms and Courtney has 1. So they're definitely not in the same positions that they were in the first time around, but certainly where they should have been. They're still not gone, the integrity of the Rusical is still preserved, it's just now at a more even playing field for everybody else. This is an odd Rusical, and if you go back and watch my Rusicals ranked, you know how I feel about this particular one. I feel like everybody was cast really odd. I feel like the structure of the show is weird. I'm not a fan of this Rusical, but that's beyond the point. Courtney Act is the winner of this challenge. and gets her first win of the season. I mean, that performance was stellar. It was next level. It was Broadway good. However, I really did not agree with Trinity being at the bottom this week. I feel like her critiques were odd. I feel like they really harped on Trinity for absolutely no reason, really trying to get her about her flipper and her enunciation, and I didn't think that was a problem. There were plenty of people that were worse than her in that rusical, and Trinity's look was stellar and should have saved her from the bottom. This week, the bottom is going to be Darian for giving us kind of a shapeless dress. It's not ugly, but it's kind of shapeless. And the performance was also not my favorite in the universe. And I do agree that April was pretty rotten in the rusical. And this dress was not my favorite thing that I've ever seen, on top of the hair not being super complimentary either. And again, I do feel like there were people that were worse this week. This was a really baffling episode as far as the bottom critiques were concerned, and Darian skating through was very confusing to me, but April ultimately will be going home this week. In episode 5 Snatch Game, this episode is going to remain exactly as it was, with Bendela winning the challenge, and Gia and Laganja both lip-syncing for their lives, because these performances were awful. And their runways were not very great either. So overall, this was the first episode that felt super fair to me, and I agreed across the board. But I do want to give a very special shout out to Jocelyn Fox for having one of my favorite Snatch Games of all time. If I really wanted to rig this video, I would have made Jocelyn win this challenge, because I thought her Teresa Johnson was the funniest thing I have seen on Drag Race, and I don't even know how long. And I quote it all the time. Prostitution hoses is still on my mind constantly. This was one of my favorite Snatch Game performances, probably of all time. Next is episode 6, Oh No She Betta Don't. And as a personal annotation, I hate this challenge. I hate this challenge. Asking the girls to rap to this kind of weirdly paced song, and then the kind of odd critiques across the board for how everybody did. I didn't enjoy this challenge at all. It's one of my least favorites in Drag Race history. Sue me, I hate this challenge, and I'm not apologizing for that. However, I completely agree with Adore winning the challenge, despite this look really being kind of a mess and a problem. I agree with Trinity being in the bottom because I don't know a single word that she said in that challenge. And even though her Crazy Sexy Cool was one of my favorite looks, probably of all time, that Trinity's done on the show, it still didn't save her from the bottom. And I completely agree that Milk was awful as well, and this look was not good either. So their critiques and their placement in the bottom made sense to me. Milk unfortunately does go home, and we get to leave this rotten, horrible episode behind us and never talk about it again. Episode 7 brings us to Glamazon by Color Revolution. In my opinion, this was sort of a turnaround episode for Trinity, and it really had an incredible storyline potential for Bianca mentoring Trinity all season, trying to befriend her, showing a soft side of Bianca, and Trinity really trying to tackle her self-doubt issues. And I feel like the possibility of this episode missing out on so many good storylines was really bizarre to me, because this is also the point where Courtney and Jocelyn really started to kind of have their beef with each other, especially not really feeling like Courtney was the person that Jocelyn thought that she was. Courtney really talking crap about Jocelyn's drag. And personally, I didn't really understand this sort of left field attack that Darian had on De La. It was sort of building up during Shade the Rusical, but Darian was sort of kind of at odds with everybody in the room. And then this sudden attack felt like a weird storyline moment that was kind of crafted out of nowhere. And I didn't think they were the worst ones in that challenge. No, the surgery storyline wasn't that good either, and it didn't have anything to do with the makeup. But Courtney and Jocelyn had no control over that particular scene. They had no idea what they were doing. They had no clue what was going on. They didn't sell makeup. And that moment where they said, well, shouldn't we open the door because it's our house? Or shouldn't we do this because it's our home? Was like, duh, are you not even paying attention? This was just such an odd moment that these two were not in the bottom, especially considering that they had some of the weakest outfits on the runway. And then this win for Adore and Laganja was also really odd to me. Adore was really the only one who did okay in that challenge, but then you look at these outfits and they're so low budget in comparison to everybody else, especially Laganja. But it wouldn't quite be fair to only give it to Adore. But Trinity and Bianca look incredible, and their performance in the challenge was incredible. So this week, I am giving the win to them instead, because I really do think they deserved it. I think this mentoring soft side of Bianca was the storyline they were trying to work towards in showing she's not such a mean cuss. She is a really nice person, and she's got a lot of story potential here that was just not tapped into. And Trinity had so much story potential that they were not tapping into. And the bottoms this week are not going to be Dela and Darian, because I mean, look at these outfits. These are next level. Darian looks so good. It's sort of everything we've been seeing all season just pared down into this really luxe fabric. I really like what Dela is wearing. It's very Cruella to me. It's very kind of avant-garde fashion, but very silly and camp at the same time. And even though Courtney's got one of my favorite looks from season 6, it was just a bodysuit. Even though it's nice, it's a very nice bodysuit. It's just a bodysuit. And Jocelyn looks like a disaster. Jocelyn looks like if you were to hire a stripper magician and they start to take everything off, but they kind of forgot that they wore 15 pairs of underwear underneath everything. It's not good. I love Jocelyn Fox, but this is bad. And I think production was really scared that if they put Courtney in the bottom, they would lose her. Because they really, I think, wanted her to the end game for just her potential of who she was as a name. But I am not afraid of losing Courtney Act in this fake world. So Jocelyn and Courtney will lip sync. And in my heart and in my soul, I do believe that Courtney would not be able to hold a candle to whatever Jocelyn did in this lip sync. And there will be no double save this week. Next we have episode 8, The Drag Queens of Comedy. Yet another huge storyline flop. We have the Adore and Laganja blow up, where Laganja feels very attacked by everybody critiquing Laganja's voice, critiquing the way that she talks, critiquing her being a character. And if Laganja were on a season now, they would eat up that character because Drag Race realizes that it's a television show. But at the time, I think it was fighting really hard about being a TV show. I think the producers wanted it to be, but they didn't know what kind they wanted it to be. And Laganja, unfortunately, took a lot of the brunt of production aggression. And I think Michelle was really an instigator in all of this, despite her not needing to be. This was a fun episode for a lot of different reasons, but it also flubbed in a lot of moments, and we'll get into that in a second. I want to address that Dela had one of the worst performances that night, no matter how bad anybody else did, getting heckled because she was not able to tell her joke, despite having some nice little nuggets in there. People are very regular in Seattle. It's because the Kofi, they're always pooping. There's a funny poop joke, and Rue loves poop jokes. She said, it's my moist area. There were a lot of really nice moments in there, right? And she could have taken her time, but she just sped through and barreled through. And we know Dela. She's a funny queen. She got totally tripped up, then got heckled by Jinx's dad, and scurried off the stage. And I think that Dela should have been lip syncing this particular week, because that performance was bad. This was a really untapped story moment for Trinity because she was really self-doubting all season, and then in this fake world, she gets her win during the Color Revolution challenge, and now she gets to stand up on her own without Bianca and really tell this really funny and memorable story that we still quote to this day, that follows her around to this day, to the fact that she even referenced it in All-Star 6. This was a solid stand-up moment, and not that Bianca was bad, but we expected Bianca to be funny. We didn't expect Trinity to be funny or look good while doing it, and she accomplished both of those things. She got the audience to literally stand up and applaud for her and change the energy after so many of these girls were flop after flop after flop. And if you've ever watched that video of Laganja, If She Were Funny, where they pipe in the judges giggling and laughing and clapping and the audience smiling, you find out that this is not that bad of a set. Her weed storyline of going to Valencia And if it's not green, I'm not interested. One of the most quotable moments from the show that has lived on in perpetuity. And this look is so manic. It was not a bad set. They just really wanted us to hate Laganja. And I can't help wonder if they wanted us to hate her so that we would love Adore a little bit more, in the same way that Sharon has said, people may have not liked me, but they hated Jeremy more. Or like people have said about Jinx, that they hated Roxy more than they disliked Jinx, and they just wanted them to win because they disliked somebody else. So it's almost like Laganja was used as a stepping stone to propel Adore a little bit further. And I don't like that she was used as a plot device. Not for that storyline, at least. If you're going to give me stories, let them be creative. And I don't feel like her placement in the bottom really was fair, because they even exploited that past the reunion and showed them reuniting and then crying together and having to hash it all out outside the show. We never really get a full resolve. And I feel like the critiques of Laganja's character and personality were really unnecessary and harsh and mean. And it should have been based off the challenge, which she was fine in. Jocelyn was bad. Darian was fine. Dela was horrible. Courtney at the time, who was still in there in this reality, was terrible. And Adore was awful. Laganja was fine. So in this world, I'm going to make Dela lip sync against Jocelyn. However, remember how I said that there was no double save the week before? That double save is happening this week because I'm not ready to see Jocelyn go home. I don't think that Dela would have done that bad. I think she probably would have done kind of a comedic twist on Stupid Girls in the same way that she did with Anaconda in All Stars 3. So I think they both would have turned out very good performances in very different ways. And I need to keep two people at some point to continue the episodes and not disrupt production at all. So the two of them get saved this week. Now going into episode 9, Drag Queens of Talk, where we had Chaz Bono and Cher's mom, Georgia Holt. Two really interesting people to do a talk show riffing off of the RuPaul show. Not really a great challenge. These queens are really charismatic, but sitting them down and asking them to do interview-style questions of people who are completely out of their wheelhouse. I can't think of anybody in here besides Jocelyn who might know anything about them. They may have gotten a really tiny little dossier, explaining a little bit about Chaz and Georgia, maybe giving them a couple prompts, what they could ask them, and then they had to figure out the rest. This would have been more successful if it had been someone who was more in the public eye. I'm thinking of Kristen Calvieri or whatever her name was from season 3, where they had to interview her, or two of the girls did. She was someone who was a little more in the public eye, was a little bit younger of a reference. This one felt like pandering to RuPaul's references, and that's my little personal aside about this episode. In the challenge, nobody did well, except for Courtney, and Dela was fine, if not passable. But everyone else was miserably bad. This was not their challenge. And everybody got kind of weird critiques. It didn't feel like anything was super consistent with how they were judging this week. I think by default, the win would have to go to Dela, because it certainly wouldn't go to Laganja, as I think she would do awful in this challenge. Bianca didn't talk to Georgia at all. Trinity kept calling Chaz Chad. Adore didn't understand the Great Depression. Jocelyn talked about Georgia's abortion choice. And Darian was in this challenge, I think. And even though Darian was sort of personable and fun, she was like a very mid-safe. So I guess Dela would win just because who else am I going to give it to? I mean, I have considered just saying nobody's going to get the win this week, but I don't know if I can do that. So I guess I'm just going to give it to her by default. That being said, I do think that Adore was the weakest, and I do think that Laganja would do horrible. Unfortunately, this would be Adore's third time lip syncing, and in my head, I think that she would have easily been sent home by Laganja, and I think this would have been the buildup that we've been seeing, especially them not winning the group challenge together, them sort of talking in Untucked about if Adore finds her personality to be authentic, because I think that was bubbling up. Even without Michelle instigating it, I do think that was bubbling up. And I think that this would have been the culmination of a storyline that we had been waiting for. We would have gotten some more resolve on that, and then we would see one of the two friends send the other home, and I do believe that it would be Laganja who would send her home. And so that leaves us with Adore gone. Gagger, I love Adore Cilantro so much, but I really do think that this should have been her end in Drag Race, at least for this season, because she had been performing so poorly up until this point. Yes, right afterwards, she kind of has a turnaround moment, but then she stumbles and ends up in the bottom a lot. So now we move to Drag My Wedding, an episode that doesn't exist in a lot of countries because of a lawsuit. If you are unaware about this lawsuit, let me just tell you, it is a doozy. It's a doozy. We won't go into that today. I do want to say Bianca was the best one in the challenge. She really turned out that makeover, and her bride looked just like she belonged in her family. Trinity wasn't here at this time, but I think that Trinity probably would have done decently. I think she probably would have gotten Jocelyn's makeover and would have been able to turn him out better rather than make him look like the freaking Tin Woodsman. I don't know how Laganja would do, and I imagine that she would probably get the guy that Adore got and would probably flub. Darian was quite awful and quite miserable in this challenge, and Dela did stunning, was easily very tied for top 2 with Bianca, but Bianca really turned out this look and deserved the win. So I am giving the win this week to Bianca, as she got in the original episode. This is where I kind of faltered, because I think that Jocelyn did so bad because this dude had a horrible attitude, but also she got someone who was not her skin tone. And if I'm to believe the rumors that I've heard about Drag Race, right after Trinity left, production threw out all the makeup that would have gone to someone with Trinity's complexion. They figured that nobody was going to need it because Trinity wasn't there anymore, so they threw out everything, and Jocelyn was left with makeup that didn't match this guy's skin tone. So she basically just had to use what she had, and he looked like a female gremlin. I think that Darian was the worst of the night. This outfit that she's wearing is terrible, and her daughter looks even worse. This was easily bottom 2 for me. And I don't know who would end up in the bottom, whether it be Jocelyn or Laganja in the bottom with her in this alternate universe. But I think that, I don't know what I think. I think that Jocelyn could have been fine had she had someone that was her ethnicity, because she looks stunning and the dress looks great too. The makeup is what's awful on this daughter. And I think that this awful, terrible human being who was cheating on his wife, who didn't want to be there in the first place, very likely would have gone to Trinity and wouldn't have looked as busted. Probably would have had a terrible attitude, but would not have looked like this. And I think Jocelyn would maybe be fine, if not a high-low. So I'm going to assume that it's Laganja who lip syncs for the 3rd time and will be sending Darian home. And unfortunately, that means that Darian Lake is out this week. And again, this whole drama about this episode not being available anywhere is so much. I'm gonna have to do a video separately about this. So now we get to episode 11, Glitter Ball, where literally the entire cast that was present initially is not here, with the exception of Bianca and Ben. So I had to make a lot of really broad assertions, because I truly don't know how this would go with some of these other contestants. To me, I feel like this would be Trinity's other win. I think Trinity knows how to sew, and we've seen that she can really turn out an outfit as season 6 is concerned for All Stars. And I think that her fashion sensibility and her sewing sensibility was strong all season and would have translated well to this particular ball, giving her her 3rd win. To me, Jocelyn is the very clear bottom here, as her sewing skills were not super great, her styling skills were a little bit odd, and I don't think that she would have embraced the materials that well. As far as the other two, I went back and forth because I really liked what Bendela was wearing, but I think they really needed to critique it harshly because they were doing the Darian Dela storyline and needed one of them to go home. But I don't think that Dela's looks were all that bad. Were they super elevated? I'm not sure. They were fine. I don't know if Laganja would do great here. As a matter of fact, I feel like Laganja would do quite badly. But maybe for the storyline of Dela and Jocelyn lip syncing a second time, because Drag Race loves putting two people together, saving them and having them lip sync again later, I'm going to have Dela lip sync this time against Jocelyn. And that means we must unfortunately say goodbye to Jocelyn Fox, one of my favorite contestants in the entire history of the show. But we now move into the final episode with such a different cast than we initially saw. Now we go to the final episode, which is Sissy That Walk, which was an odd challenge. I didn't really like the acting portion. I'm glad that we've done away with these acting challenges now that we're so many seasons in the future. But it's time to make some clear discussions here. Going into the finale and having to go all the way to the end, I think it makes sense to me that people with wins should be at the finale and should be lip syncing for the crown. Laganja is the very clear out to me. And I do believe that Laganja would have been eliminated in this particular scenario because she had so many bottom placements and no wins. But we have an interesting and precarious position because Dela has 4 wins but 2 bottom lip syncs. Trinity has 3 wins and 1 bottom, and Bianca had a lot of really great story moments with 2 wins and no bottoms. So now with a season that has been judged less on who do we want to get to the end, because we really need to make sure that there's this tension that's happening that we've manufactured between Dela and Darian, and having these 2 idols be a distraction while we push them to the very end. How is this finale judged? It feels so much murkier because we have someone like Bianca who had a very clear run throughout the entire thing, did solidly through each episode, didn't kill it a lot of the time, but did well enough to survive. Trinity, who I think did pretty consistently all season. Did she knock it out of the park every week? No, but once she really got off the ground, she started moving fast. In the same way that her trajectory was in All-Star 6. I don't think her trajectory was that different in this season either. She just took a moment to warm up, and the judges weren't really recognizing her positive growth. Then you've got someone like Dela who was really killing it week after week after week in the same way she did in All-Stars 3. But these are such different people than we saw the first time around. Do you think that Bianca would still win in this fake world? Or do you think that it would go to Dela or Trinity? Personally, I feel like Trinity was a perfect winner for this season. If she had been treated well throughout her time here, and if she had been rewarded the way she should have been, she had an excellent growth arc. And in this alternate universe that I've concocted, if Bianca doesn't win this season, she could potentially come back for All-Stars 2. Being there with Adore when Adore got those really harsh critiques, convincing her to stay and to show the judges that she means business, and could have really helped motivate her to stay to the end. And maybe Bianca could have been there to sort of break up Rolodex and used some of her sharp tongueness to combat a lot of those wins that were getting tossed around left and right to people in All-Stars 2 that maybe should have gone to other people. It could be a really interesting scenario if Trinity wins. And then we still would get Bendela's really iconic return to All-Stars 3, but maybe this time she wouldn't cuck herself because she already got so close to the end and almost won that maybe she would stay. What do you think? Who do you think would win in this alternate universe? So those are my thoughts, and I'm sticking to them. I think this is a dynamic cast. I think that the way this ended was really interesting in this alternate universe. I think there's so many possibilities in some weird AU where Adore goes to All-Stars with Bianca, and Adore makes it to top 4, and Bianca makes it about to the point where Alyssa was. Maybe instead of Jeremy, Bianca is there, or maybe Bianca is there with and is just an extra. In a series where Trinity wins, who goes to All-Star 6 from this cast? Maybe Darian would have been there sooner and wouldn't have gotten cucked like she did in season 8. There's a lot of ways that this alternate universe could have fleshed out. And in my opinion, it doesn't change really much about the trajectory that even Bianca had. It really just changes Adore and Courtney, who I do believe were favored through the whole season. There's a point where even Michelle is confused why Adore got a win with Laganja. And I think it was because they were so scared to lose Courtney. And I still don't quite understand where that energy came from. I put out a lot of Drag Race content along with gaming stuff. That's like my main thing that I post here. I post a lot of just variety, so feel free to follow. Check out some of my other things that I post. And remember, keep it foxy. Womp womp. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to click that like button. And if you want to see more, hit subscribe. Goodbye.